Welcome back to the Kitchen Table Podcast. As always, it's me, Tony. Ryan's here also. Dale's here. We're all kind of reunited back in the studio for the first time together. I say studio. This is our barrage. This is at Dale's house. We thank him for his hospitality. As always, we want to shout out a few people. Some of our main sponsors, 1-800-BOARD-UP. Located all over the world, but here specifically in Central Indiana, they have a huge outreach program with the fire service, and we're very thankful to have them along for the ride. As always, the official Decon soap of the Kitchen Table Podcast, Flame Decon. Tara out in Colorado has a passion for the fire service and removing cancer from the fire service. That's our charge. It'll always be our charge. Axehead Threads, the official apparel company of the Kitchen Table Podcast, and Charge the Line Designs. That's our newest sponsor. They do custom engraving on tumblers and everything. We're very thankful for them. Use the code KTP15 for 15% off at Flame Decon and Charge the Line Designs. So today we are extremely blessed. I've been excited for this since I found out about it. Central Indiana is a small place. We know a lot about each other, and this is an episode that I've been waiting for a long time. We have he's a very humble guy, so I'm a little remiss to say this, but he's a bit of a Central Indiana giant, per se, in the fire service. So we have Captain Mike Spalding, retired from Indianapolis Fire Department, on today. Dale, do you want to say anything, or you got any shout-outs I missed? Anything?
Not really shout-outs. We do have a guest also in attendance. You know, we're starting to get I don't know, a snake pit. I don't know. We need to call this area
so,
a fire pit or oil pit or whatever to go with the barrage. I don't.
Dale has kind of let us into his house, and he made it mention that he wanted this to be a place for firefighters. He wanted this show to be a place for firefighters. And truth be told, I didn't know if it's actually just an insight. It's Dale's son is our guest here in the barrage today, and I kind of thought maybe he was just grounded or something. But we're happy to have him, and like we said, I'm a big proponent of legacy in the fire service, and I think this is really cool to have your son here. And I hope we can grow this thing.
I'm excited about this one. I've heard our guests speak before. On the topic. Not really had much leadership discussion with him. I'm looking forward to this. This is what, episode 17?
17, yeah.
So episode 18 is going to be really cool.
Yeah.
We're going to South Bend. We're doing a training roundtable, and I think I'm looking forward to that too. It's gonna be fun.
Road trip.
So just to not jump too far ahead for next week. Next week is a big one. This one is the biggest one for me. I'm a bit of a history junkie in the fire service. Have been. I've taught every recruit school the history of the fire service since I started instructing. Every recruit school that goes through Sugar Creek Township, I teach them history of the fire service, and we go over ways that critical incidents have affected the fire service, and how the 9/11s, the Worcester, Massachusetts, the Charleston 9, and then I do a specific Central Indiana one, and there is no bigger incident in Central Indiana to me that has changed the fire service than the athletic club fire. So I make it a point that every firefighter that comes through our agency knows the sacrifice that was made and how that changed Central Indiana and Indianapolis. So this one is a big one for me. I'm very blessed to be sitting here, and without further ado, let's have Captain Mike Spalding, retired of the Indianapolis Fire Department. Let's have him introduce himself.
Oh, hi, I'm Mike Spalding. It's an honor to be here, for starters. I appreciate you guys inviting me. I really do. I got to tell you, your atmosphere is very relaxing and comforting to firefighters. I've been fire stations all over the country, and a lot of fire department related bars, because there's a fire department bar in every part of the country, and it feels very comfortable here. I got to tell you guys.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice.
We're blessed to have you on, sir.
Got to correct you guys. I mean, I was a captain for a long, long time, And but for the last 7 years or so, I was promoted. So I try to keep it a secret. No, just kidding. But no, that was the.
So you retired as a battalion chief?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So
7
correction, we have Chief Mike Spalding.
But
retired.
but I prefer. Like I tell everybody, my friends call me Mike. Please, Mike is perfectly fine. And I mean, I do all respect, for those that come before me, and I have no problem at all calling those guys chief. But I'm comfortable with Mike.
So we're getting started already seeing the humbleness of this Captain Chief. I mean, that the humbleness that it's not about his rank. I would love to work with this gentleman, just like Lieutenant Steve Dillman, just for the fact that I know that just from that moment, I know this guy took care of his people.
Well, absolutely. I think that he was just. We were telling him that I recently just got promoted to battalion chief, and one of the very first things he told me, and I've been told this before, but it was so nice to hear coming from him, and it ties in with what we're talking about. He said, "Make sure you're humble. Make sure you remember where you came from." That's kind of been my charge since I got the cross bugles, and I want the firefighters to know that I'm there for them, and it's great to hear someone that I've read about. I've taught firefighters about. So I'm really looking forward to this. So can Chief Mike? I'm a big call people by their rank. I think they've earned it. However,
it's all right.
Mike, I want you to kind of for the listeners who don't know who you are, kind of just give us a quick background of who you are, where you came from, when you got started in the fire service, and so on.
Okay. Well, I'll try and keep it brief. Lifelong Indianapolis resident. Most of my family's still here. Grew up on the near east side, just another baby boomer kid, and fascinated by the fire service. But it wasn't until I was a young man in my 20s that I went in that direction. Because, like I said, baby boomers, jobs were a little tougher to get back then, and there was a lot of people going for them. And I thought, well, it's a future, it's secure, and I needed it. I was expecting a baby at the time. I mean, I was recently married, so I needed a job. I really did. I had no idea what I was getting into. So started on the fire department in May of 1978, one of 35 in my class, and it was a culture shock. Bear in mind, back then it was, Vietnam's winding down, and things were changing tremendously. And at that time on the Indianapolis Fire Department, there were still guys from World War II that were working. There were guys from the Korean War that were working, and Vietnam vets were everywhere. They could all be at your kitchen table. So for me, the input on information and ideas and ways of doing things and values, I mean, it was just, I'd never experienced anything like it. And it was stimulating. But you found out that you were a part of something much bigger than anything you'd ever been a part of. And I loved it. I mean, I played team sports when I was in grade school and high school, and I had my buddies I hung around with, and I was into cars when I was in my young days, and it just seemed like, it's a hands-on, blue-collar kind of work, which I adapted to very well. So it was my kind of place. Make a short story.
How long was your recruit school?
Oh, that's a good question. It wasn't that long back then. I was thinking, I want to say 12 weeks, I think. And don't quote me on that. I'm sure somebody will correct us. But it was short compared to today. I mean, they whapped you right through, got you out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was 7 years before I was born. I don't want to make you feel old. But, when you have...
I was 8.
You have giants sitting at the table, World War II, guys.
Oh, my gosh, the greatest generation.
In that sense, thinking about what I know now, I would be in a hurry to get people out there because I think you're going to learn more from these guys than you're going to learn from me. So I in so many ways, I always say this, this fire service is still great. It's still everything that I wanted in life, but I always say I should have been born 40 years sooner because those guys were what I wish we had today.
Yeah, for sure.
We got some great old guys and guys passing on knowledge and great senior guys, but life experiences of the Korean War and the Vietnam War and by all means, World War II, having those guys sitting there, that would be. We talk all the time. If you could Dale asks this question all the time. If you could sit with anyone, and I would sit with 1950s, 1960s firefighters all day long.
Yeah.
Well, I would say kudos to you guys for doing this kind of thing, inviting old guys like me in, because I think back on my early days, and I talked to some of those guys, those old timers, but trying to relate to them. I look back on it now, and I wish I would have asked them so many more questions.
Oh,
because there's so
absolutely.
much to learn from those guys. There's a lot of wisdom, about everything, including life. But
Wouldn't it have been nice to have their stories in audio or video that
Yeah.
we could go back and listen to?
yeah, absolutely. And some of the guys, they've been through horrific things in World War II, and then they come on the fire department, and like Tommy Donlin, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he was a survivor of the USS Indianapolis. One of the guys that was in the shark-infested water that got rescued. He came on the Indianapolis Fire Department and was working as the stagehand at the Indianapolis Fairgrounds the night that the Coliseum blew
exploded?
up.
Oh, my
he's the guy that
gosh.
called it in to the fire dispatch to bring him out. So, there's a guy, a dedicated guy, serving his country in World War II, comes back and serves his community, and lots of horrific events that those guys went through. So,
Yeah, we in the fire service, I think we do a really good job of paying tribute to our veterans. They get certain points and processes, and I think we get a lot of value out of military guys. One of the things that's always fascinated me, I've been a fire service junkie since I didn't want to go to the military at all. Nothing against the military. I wanted to figure out how could I get on a fire truck as soon as possible.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That was my whole goal. One of the things that's always fascinated me is those guys took 2 oaths. They took an oath to their country, and if that cost them their life, most of them fortunate enough to come home, and then they took an oath to their city. I don't think you can state highly enough how respectable that is.
Yeah, that's just, I can't imagine that. The guys, there are gentlemen that I wish I would have listened to. We had when I was at Franklin Fire Department, Stanley Orzak wasn't a firefighter. He actually he got drafted to play for the Phillies, professional baseball, and then he got drafted to the military. So that ended his career, but he would come by the firehouse every day to play cards. And we took time out every day to play cards with him. My regret is I wish I wouldn't have talked to him more about the 50s, the 60s,
Yeah, sure.
and stuff like that. So
The young days of the early 80s. What does Indianapolis? What's it like back then?
oh, wow. Going through some serious transitions because you can bear in mind, this is before like the professional football came to town. I think basketball, I believe, was still ABA back then or close to it, but Indianapolis hadn't grown like it is today. It was on the precipice, if you will, of great things. Some fantastic leadership, some innovative ideas. And we were in the downtown area when I started, because I worked downtown quite a bit of my career. And the back then, at 9 to 5 was when the people were there, most people. Then they went to the suburbs.
Yeah.
And the only people hanging out downtown were super low-income people, let me put it that way, and firefighters, police officers, some ambulance people, and it was, the Union Station hadn't been renovated yet. It was vacant. A lot of the buildings were in rough condition, and things started to change because they wanted to make it the amateur sports capital of the world. Because back then, all we had really was the Indy 500, which was a big, big deal, but that was just the month of May, and that was it. And they developed a plan to get this city and modernize it and attract more people. And they did a fantastic job. They really did. And we had a front row seat to that. So, I respect excellent leadership, and in my opinion, we had it by the armloads back then.
Yeah, and I talked to some guys and that worked back in those days, and they talked about how 465 stopped.
That's true.
The east side, they would burn every day, multiple times a day on the
yeah.
east side because all the vacant
Yeah.
houses. And
Oh yeah, yes indeed.
that's
You know,
crazy.
well, and being from the Indianapolis area my whole life, one of the things we've seen Indianapolis change over the years. When I grew up on the east side, over by the Christian Park area, it was working blue collar families, and you know, many of which are still there today. I still have relatives that they go to work every day, and that's where they live. But when you sit back from Indianapolis and you look through a glass, you know, you think, oh, this is a violent area, and this is, you know, these are people who started out as factory jobs that may have moved away, and you know, the revitalization of Indianapolis has been fun to see over the past couple of years. But like you said, it did have a rough stretch, and you know, your fire department has to match your area. So being on the fire department through growth and through, you know, recession and everything, I'm sure that must have been wild.
Yeah, it definitely was. It definitely was. As I recall, when I started on the fire department, money was tight. They weren't very loose with the money. Like I can recall going to the fire prevention area for something at one time, the office, and they had tons of old used furniture, used file cabinets. I mean, it was hand-me-downs, you know, because they were big on not spending any money that they didn't have to, including on fire department equipment, apparatus, and you know, salaries. I mean, just if money was tight, you know, and but you did the best with what you had, and you know, we still put the fires out and took care of people, and we didn't know really how much better it could be, you know, because you work with what you have,
Right.
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
and the people that you work with, yeah, they make all the difference in the world. Oh my God.
Your crew's the big part of you. You know, going to work, like I was telling you. You know, you got to have that good crew to enjoy going to work. If you have that shit crew, you just sometimes you're like, ugh.
Oh, yeah.
You know, but when you have a good crew, you look forward every single day going.
You
to work.
know that can't be overstated.
Yeah.
It really can't. It. How can I say it? I don't know if you're familiar with Dick Winters. He was the guy who was
Yeah.
in Band of Brothers.
Yes.
He was the guy I was all modeled after. Phenomenal fellow. He's passed away now. But he had made a comment once in one of his books that I read about him that, you know, people say, how did you do it? I mean, man, those guys, you know, went from Normandy all the way to Germany, you know, and the sacrifice and how difficult that was. And of course, everybody wants to say, well, you guys must have really been like carrying the flag and really working hard, you know, for your country and trying to defeat all this fascism and all the bad things that were going on. And he says, really, he says, when it boils down to it, he goes, your small crews, your small teams, he goes, you're fighting for each other. He says, you're taking care of each other. He says, and then he goes, that's at the core of it. And I think back in that term and how it relates to the fire service. And I think how many times that we get up in the middle of the night and have to go out and fight a god-awful fire and, you know, pull people out and people in horrendous situations and think, yeah, you know, we're doing it to protect the city. And we were, absolutely. We took an oath and we were all serious about it. But, man, we want to make sure everything gets done, everybody, our crew's safe, you know, that our friends that we're working with, that, hey, good job, you know, you did it. And, you know, it's part of being on a team, you know. I mean, just like any sports team, you know, say, well, you're playing for the city of Indianapolis, you know. Well, yes and no. You know, they're playing for the team members too, you know. So I don't know if that makes a lot of sense to you guys
No,
or not.
yeah.
No, I think it makes perfect sense. One thing that I have talked about before is, you know, politics are going to come and go, and the fire service relies on politics. They control the money and everything. But when you're at your firehouse and you know the politics of everything's got you down, and maybe the raise didn't come, and maybe the equipment's falling apart, you can always look around to your crew and realize, I don't know that I can live without these guys. You know, they become so much of your family. I got on and I only looked for another job once, and still to this day I regret doing that because I love where I'm at. and I can't imagine my life without those guys. So, I can't imagine through the burning years and all of the fires and the 80s and the recession and all that, how much that probably resonated with you.
Oh. Well, I always gravitated toward the busiest companies, just where they had all the activity. And that was just, my nature to be busy. I was used to being busy before I came on the fire department, and I got bored easily. I wanted to do stuff. And the busy firehouses were always in the toughest neighborhoods, and they had the type A personality people, and they worked hard, they played hard, and it was exciting and it was interesting. And I loved that. Yeah. I did. And to me, it was stimulating that to challenge yourself, to be a part of something like that. And it gives you a chance to try to be your best. And notice I say try. To try to be your best and to learn from other people.
Yeah, I'm gonna shout Dale out here. I've heard Dale say this. I don't know where. It could have been a Facebook post, but I can remember it. Someone, an internet troll or something, said something about they're not even doing fires, and I remember Dale say, "Yeah, but some of these people have learned from those who did fires." And I think that in today's culture, we, my department, we don't run a lot of fires, so. I don't get the opportunity to be at a busy house or, it might be busy for us. But one thing that I have always prided myself on since I read that from Dale, we don't give Dale enough credit for how much he actually influences. But one of the things that that's always resonated with me is I want to go to classes. I want to have people on the podcast that did this.
Yeah.
Because that's where I'm going to learn. That's where I'm going to get tidbits of information. Like I told you, that was when you got on the Indianapolis Fire Department, I was not even thought of. My parents were, I think, just getting started in their life. So, it's wild for me. I know Indianapolis, I know the history, but it's so incredibly cool to have you here to talk about that, because I didn't realize that. The Indianapolis Fire Department we know today is townships and everyone surrounding, and they've done mergers through policies and political and, but the Indianapolis when I was coming up, that was just the east side, a little bit of the west side, a little pocket of the city. And, it's a city that I've always loved. I've never thought of moving anywhere else. So this is great for me.
I would like to mention one thing, jumping back to the training academy when I started in May of 78. Toward the end of the training academy, they would take small groups, like 5 or 6 guys, whatever was in your small section, and the trainers, their captains and lieutenants, would take you off to the side to have what they called a shade tree conversation about you're getting ready to go into the fire service, the Indianapolis Fire Service, and things are going to be a little different than anything you've ever expected. And in other words, there's a wide variety of people back then, and man, the sky was the limit on all sorts of things, as far as firehouse life goes. Let me put it that way. But what they emphasized was that the most important thing you will have when you leave here is your name. And he says, a good name will follow you your entire career. He said, but if you screw it up, if you do any one of many, many things where you can screw it up, it'll follow you everywhere. Because they said, as you sub throughout the city, as you go, especially brand new sub, as you go from station to station, they're calling the station you're going to. You got this kid coming, and they give you a quick rundown about the kid.
Be on the lookout.
Yeah, and actually back then, of course, it's all males back then, and they treated you like a little brother if they liked you. Now, if you've ever had a big brother, they can be pretty rough on you.
Oh, yeah.
And they can test you, they can be harsh, but in the end, they want you to grow up to be a good person, And that's kind of the way it was. And that thing I just wanted to emphasize I think that's still as important today as it ever was, is that your name is everything. And if you don't value your name and respect that element of tradition, that's kind of like your North Star, if you will,
Mm-hmm. We it's funny you mentioned that. We've actually, we've talked about my recent promotion, and I've thought about this at every level. When I first became a lieutenant, when I first became a captain, and now that I've become a battalion chief, one thing that I've thought about was, would I want me right now making that call? if I was a firefighter, would I like what I'm doing right now? And every step of the way, because we've all had that boss that got in there and he had rules, but then you're like, 6 weeks ago, you had a black helmet on and you hated that. 6 weeks ago, you might have frowned on a nap during the day, but I just passed you 6 weeks ago and you were in the middle of a 3-hour nap, and now we're not allowed to do that. So I've thought about that with the recent promotion, but I've tried to think of it every step of the way. Is remember what you were like when you were a firefighter.
Yeah.
And don't make a rule, don't make a policy, and don't put out a memo that you would be like, this is trash. So right now I'm learning a new group of guys, and I'm really trying to think, like, if I say this, how would I react if I was in their seat? So it's funny you mentioned that, and I would backpedal about 10 minutes. I'm actually currently reading Dick Winter's Band of Brothers, the memoirs from the war, and if you want to develop any type of leadership, that's a book. You can get little bitty sentences in there. I'm about 8 chapters in, little bitty snippets of what it's like, and everybody knows it from Band of Brothers. But when you actually read the words, and you read how he talked about the officer he had during the infamous first episode of Band of Brothers, that terrible officer that required this, and this, So I think he does a really good job of talking about leadership in that book, and that's going to bring me to the next one. We always try and ask people, specifically the officers, back in the 80s, when did you think, I got enough time on, I want to go out for this promotion?
Well, that's a good question. Very good question, actually, because I went for promotion the first opportunity that I had, and one of the things that I found was that, from my perception back then, was that everything was competitive. Who's going for promotion? What's your chances of getting promoted? What's your opportunities? Now, back then, I had this vision that there were the new people that were coming on had college. Some of them had college degrees, and I could see that, man, that could be the wave of the future. If you didn't have a college degree, good luck getting promoted and advancing in the fire service. So I looked at it as like a window of opportunity more than anything. Plus, I thought I'd make a few extra bucks, which would be good too.
Yeah.
But as far as, I want to be a leader of men, that never crossed my mind. It truly didn't. I figured that, I've learned from a ton of officers. I thought, well, I can do, probably as well as some of these guys. I can't do it as well as some of them, but I can do it as well as some of these guys can. And so I thought I was kind of up to the task. And then the same thing happened when I got promoted to captain. Because I went at 7 years when I became a lieutenant, then 10 years at a private. In retrospect to it, I wish I would have waited, honestly, because you learn so much on the back step and been more patient. But I've never been a patient person. But if I had to do it again, now once I decided to become a battalion chief, I talked to a lot more people that I knew and I respected, and kind of got their blessing, approval, recommendation to, because it's I was perfectly happy as a captain at the 14s. Perfect, a great crew. My God, we had lots of interesting runs it was a tactical team, and but it was one of those things that I guess who knows when it's the right time. Who knows, and, you look back on your career and you go, well, I do this differently or I do that differently. I think everybody gets to that point, especially once you're retired. So I guess my suggestion to anybody that's thinking about getting promoted is that don't do it alone. Have some mentors who you respect and admire, and have some one-on-one conversations with them. Ask them, do you think I'm ready? Do you think, what else do I need to do? I think that's what the wise person does.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. I've mentioned it in one, and I think that we've all maybe talked about it. I hate myself for the first way I went out through for a lieutenant. In my agency, I don't want to be on an ambulance anymore. The way to not be on an ambulance was to be an officer, and then it was who I look around my agency and tons of great guys, almost 100%, just good people. But there were a few that's like, I don't want to work for that guy. And the only way to prevent that was to go out for myself. I tripped, stumbled, and landed in the top 2. And was like, holy cow. And then I ended up getting promoted. And like I said, ever since then, I've hated myself for the reasons, because it was just the wrong reasons. We do have this culture in the fire service now where the college degree is important. I think that we do a really good job of rewarding people with college degrees. And I think there's a lot of value in the college degree and higher education. But I think that you can't accept that as the normal, because you're going to miss out on a lot of quality individuals if all you're looking for is a piece of paper. Guys that, like you said, rode the backstep and got real world experience. Yes. And then when I promoted to captain, it was a little bit easier. It was like, all right, now I want to do this because I want to lead a crew. This firehouse that I'm in charge of now, it looks like an office building. I want to make it a firehouse. So I had a deeper vision. I don't think that can be overstated enough. Dale, correct me if I'm wrong, that, the reason you want to promote is so important.
Well, and that was, I remember years ago, I wasn't eligible for a promotional process at the fire department. And I remember one of the guys going through the process. And remember, we learn a lot of stuff from bad officers or bad employees. This guy wanted to get promoted so he didn't have to do house chores anymore. And I learned a lot from that guy of what not to do. And
the house chores really aren't that bad. Now my guys don't let me do them. They did that even when I was an officer. They're like, you shouldn't be doing that, or you shouldn't be doing that. But that every time you've said that has blown my mind, because it's like, mopping ain't that bad, or
I'd rather clean a toilet than do dishes any day, though.
Hell yeah.
But the irony of it is, I think the longer you're around on the back step and you see more examples of leadership, one of the things that stands out in my mind, it's like everything else in life where you see somebody that's really, really good at something, whatever it is, including a fire department officer. They're really good at it. They make it look easy. And you think that guy's just a natural leader. That guy's just a natural athlete or natural whatever. You think it's easy for him. But in fact, for most people that are like that, it's taken them years and years to hone that craft. It's taken them years of insight, because I've always believed that leadership is a combination of, and believe me, I've read plenty of books on leadership. I've also observed a lot of people I thought were good leaders. So it's a blend between, science and art. The guy that's a good leader, he knows people, he knows something about human nature. He knows about risk reward, what motivates people. He's got a pretty good perception of himself, how people perceive him. But he also tailors it to the moment, It is, and when they blend all that together, they make it look easy. It's just like they say with anybody with a lot of experience, it's almost like magic. Like, how'd they do that? That was pretty smooth. That fascinating. But they've got that element, that thing,
Yeah, and I can't agree more. And while we're talking about it, and I don't want to be seen as trashing the college degrees, but every time you make a decision as an officer, you usually try and have an experience to pull from in the back of your mind. Well, I saw this individual do this, and we had this fire, and the shift before us talked about this fire, and they had this happen. And I fear the day that fire service is only relying on education, because every decision I've ever made, every fire I've ever been in has been like, all right, well, I've seen this previously, or this happened, or I went to this class and I got this from it. I think the fire service does a really good job of continual training, and usually we don't need a college, or I worked on my bachelor's for about 6 months and realized in art class, why do I need to take an art class? And that was the last day of college for me. And that's just me. Now I do work with individuals who have college degrees, and they're in positions higher than me because of the college degrees, because they know how to do the accounting and everything. Biggest struggle for me when I became house captain was we audit our books every 3 months, and I'd never audited a checkbook ever in my life. Never did a registry or whatever. So the girl that does the auditing for us, she was like, "You don't know how to do a checkbook?" And I was like, "No, I log online and watch all the transactions." So she actually had to teach me how to do that. So there's a balance there that you have to have of education, but real world experience. Guys, you mentioned you really liked cars and everything, and I think those guys are so valuable in the fire service. I grew up holding a flashlight from my dad. That was it. I never paid attention. I just held the flashlight. So I don't know about cars, but I got 6 people around me that know about cars and can bring real value to fire apparatus and engineering.
You're bringing a really good point to bear, and this is one of the things that I was taught as a young officer, is that when you get your crew, you need to know where these guys' strengths are. And like we had back in the day, electricians and plumbers and guys that were builders, carpenters, all sorts of things, everything under the sun. Well, the sooner you got to know their strengths and how that played into whatever emergency you were on, and when you go to them, say, "What's your opinion? What do you think what do you think?" And that not only gives you the knowledge, but that person's like, "Hey, I'm valued. I'm a valued person here." And that is key. That is, because everybody wants to be a part of the team, a productive part of the team,
And when you're part of a tactical house, like you were, you need to pull those resources and knowledge in.
Fire service is ever changing. Technical rescue is here, and it's not a strong suit of mine. But there's 6 guys, like you just talked about, Chief. There's 6 guys below me that is something that they're into and they're good at. And like you said, we have electricians, we have plumbers, and every situation, every fire, every run we go on, there is a need to have someone who and at one point, if you stop and you look around in the fire service and you think you're the smartest person there, you got to find it. You got to find a new room. If my agency is relying on me to be the smartest person, then we're not putting our best foot forward for the citizens. I like to call myself an expert of logistics. I bring people together. I'm a good staging officer. I can get you an electrician. Let me make a phone call. I can get you a plumber. I can get you someone who knows about a car, and I'll hold the flashlight while we do it. And so, that it's great to hear, someone who rose the ranks in the 80s saying something that is still so relevant today.
Yeah. When we're talking about education, I know some people that have master's degrees and they can organize a file real well, but they can't organize a crew. They can't organize a shift, and it doesn't matter how educated you are or uneducated. We can never decide what we're doing for meals. That's the hardest decision of the day. Probably back in your day too.
But that's another interesting thing you bring up, is that no matter how educated you are, but if you walk into an area and thinking, by virtue of my diploma, by virtue of my years of study and accomplishment, at the university, that they're entitled to something, well, that doesn't play real well in the fire service in my experience. It just doesn't. It's because basically it's still a blue-collar job. And we had people who that were well-educated, that they were, I hate to use the word clumsy, but they weren't comfortable out on an emergency scene. That wasn't their forte. Not that they couldn't contribute to the organization, they could, but there's a place for them, and it's not leading a group of guys or a group of firefighters in the middle of the night in a dicey situation, because those guys will follow a leader, somebody that they trust, they respect, to get the job done and hopefully keep them out of trouble. And like they say, if nobody's following you, you're not a leader. I don't care what your badge says.
Yeah.
Yeah, they won't follow you across the street.
I absolutely love that you keep mentioning blue collar because I think so many times we forget the very definition of a firefighter is a public servant. And there are no white collar jobs where the title is servant. And we are public servants. No matter what rank you're at, you are a servant. Now it's my job to serve 2 firehouses that are under me. And before then it's my job to serve 1 firehouse that I'm in charge of. And before that it was 1 engine company. So no matter what rank you get, you have to realize that you're a public servant. And as you climb in any officer role, you have to realize that now I'm a servant. Like, these guys don't work for me, I work for them.
It's no longer about you.
Right.
They don't want to hear if you've had a bad day, if you got a problem at home with a kid or your wife. They don't want to hear that, man, I'm this or I'm that. Once you get into those upper ranks, you're right. You're there to serve them and take care of them. What they want, I believe, is somebody who, number 1, can make the difficult decisions that other people don't want to make. Number 2, somebody that can do, I guess, how would you say it? They can do the things that need to be done. And that's kind of a general statement, but I think anybody that's worked for an officer that they felt was incompetent knows what I mean. And it's an empty feeling if you have somebody where you don't have the trust in. Real quick story, if I may.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When
I'm all ears, sir.
When my kids were in grade school, they were playing volleyball, and I was helping coach, and loved it, absolutely loved it. And was coaching through the CYO system, and they had a thing where anybody that coached had to go in for a seminar. It was downtown, and at the time, their guest speaker was a guy named Clark Kellogg, who used to play for the Pacers many years ago. He ended up becoming an analyst and a TV personality at sporting events or basketball. And he was a speaker, and he was fairly recent out of the NBA due to his injury. And he spoke, and I never will forget the speech, because he was talking in terms of coaching, which is leadership on the fire department. It's got a lot of parallels. Well, he was to ask everybody, he goes, he says, everybody in here's probably played sports for their schools. Of course, everybody nodded. He goes, okay, some people play. How many people played in grade school? Some in junior high, high school, some on to college, a lot. The room's full of people, football, basketball, you name it. They were guys from all different sports. And he goes, okay, so I want everybody just to take a moment. He goes, he says a minute. He goes, think about all your coaches you had, all your coaches, and you think, tell me, after you think about it for a minute, I want to ask you a question. So, room went silent, big room. Finally, he broke the silence. He goes, okay. He goes, everybody got a coaching name? Yeah. So he went around, and everybody started naming off different coaches. And he says, I bet I know what every one of those coaches has in common. So I was like, well, we're all ears, And he says, tell me if this would describe your coach. That your most favorite coach is a guy who, in your heart of hearts, you knew he cared about you and your future. It was that simple. And he wanted you to perform the best of your ability. And man, you could look around the room and see all these old tough guys nodding, and they were, he hit the nail on the head. And I think the fire service leadership, could learn from that, because if you don't have it in your heart, the guys are going to know it, So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. We could close right there. The most valuable tidbit you'll probably get.
I do have a kind of a 2-part question here. What is the one thing, like, response-wise that you're like, I can't believe we're doing this now? And secondly, what is probably the biggest change in the fire service, whether at the firehouse or out on the street, that you think probably changed it the most in your career? So it's kind of 2-part. I'll go back to the second question after, because I know I forget.
Yeah, let me answer the second one first. So that's fresh on my mind. that what is different. And I mean, there was changes that were taking place when I was active. And it was, because I was around back in the days when I saw, the old style and the old system of doing things. And it is, I believe the New York Rescues still do this, but the captains of those rescues are able to choose their crew members. They, like, you look at a room like guys like us, we go, well, I know all you guys, I know a little history about you, I know your families, I know, I can count on you. And they gave those captains a latitude to pick their people, Well, in the modern world that we live in, the powers that be don't like that subjective choosing, because you bring in biases, and those biases may be unfair to people. And I get that. I do get that. But having experienced both that old way of doing things and the newer way of doing things, I saw the transition, which was back not that many years ago. If you were going to put in for a fire station, you'd call the captain and let them know, hey, I'd like to put in for your station, and it's all seniority list and plus qualifications. So they'd want to come to the firehouse, meet everybody, and kind of get that seal of approval. And if the captain had somebody else in mind that, well, this is a guy who's been on, say, the back step, and he wants to be the engineer now, he knows the battalion or he knows the district, I'd really like to have him. Well, most guys would back away because you don't want to go someplace where you're not wanted.
Yep.
And I saw it happening where some folks were like, well, I don't care. I'm coming. This is where I want to be. So they went against that old tradition. And sometimes it worked out. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the chemistry was off, and it was kind of detrimental to the crew, sadly. But that's a change that, I saw, for better or for worse.
We still have those conversations today.
I was actually just getting ready to say, when I was union president a couple months ago, I was blessed to be able to work on a shift bid policy, and one of the things we did, and I hope this is, a nod to you guys, and is myself and another. He was my battalion at the time. When we wrote the policy, we really wanted people to still have that conversation. Now, obviously, policies, union contracts, all of that benefit you from rejecting people. But I really, really, as an officer, like the ability for a guy to come to me and say, I want to be here, because I got to say, well, why do you want to be here?
You interviewed the guy.
Yeah. I got an opportunity to say, and if you're not the best fit for the crew, I love the diversity aspect. I love that we have people from different walks of life, but you couldn't have said it any better by saying, you want to make sure that it's a crew that meshes well. Mm-hmm. So we put that in our policy. We worked with a lawyer and was able to put that you have to come to the company officer. And if you're an officer, you have to come to the battalion. And, there are some things in the fire service that's going to change, but through working with the chief and the lawyers, we were able to put a policy in that kind of appease both sides. So
that's great to hear.
I absolutely love that. Have since I got on. I've known many Indianapolis guys that they still operate like that today, and I think you're going to get the best teams, the best crew, and I think you're going to get people who want to serve the citizens by playing that game per se.
That's how our department does it too.
Ours.
Yeah,
that's great.
That's great. As much as you're right, policies, the way of the world has gotten in the way of you just outright saying, no, you're not coming here.
Yeah. Well, a little example of that is when that last part of my career when I was a battalion chief, I had 6 stations and was going every day visiting the guys. So you had to take care of minor things and issues that came up. And also part of the thing was the evaluations of them, which everybody hated, especially me.
It's that time of the year, too.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. But I always had that standard thing. I'd ask the guys, the lieutenants and the captains, and I'd say, what do you think your job is, in the fire service? What do you think, what's the essence of your job? And all kinds of answers. And I'd say, well, I said, I think your best bet is to think of your job as, you're supposed to be effective. You're supposed to be effective. Now, say, well, what's that mean? Well, your job description. You know what we're supposed to be doing, save lives and, protect property and so forth. I said, but, so you want to be effective at doing that, whether you're on an ambulance or a ladder crew or engine crew or whatever it is you're doing. You want to do it and do it well. So, but the key to that, in my opinion, is that you want to have some happy people that work for you. Because happy people don't have problems. Happy people are glad to come to work and do their job. They're happy to, like you say, serve the citizens. And you got a more of a harmonious work environment. And Steve Dimlin was a great one at that, explaining how those guys at 27s got along great. They did. And Steve was a wonderful, wonderful, great leader. And it is, sometimes we just make things a lot more complicated than they need to be.
That's what we do. It's what we're good at.
If we could sit down and write policies, we can for Dale's bar. But unfortunately, the way of the world, like that's what's happened. So
I do have a policy in the bar. Be nice.
The one thing that, well, then we break that all the time when we talk about Ryan. But the one thing that
we haven't said a thing about his head.
That's one.
We had an over/under of 5. How many bald jokes we were going to have.
Got into it for how many minutes before it kicked off?
I told Ryan that I thought it was going to be under because I got to come up with new material.
Yeah, we got to get something.
Let's get back on track. But I love that was brought up because it's a real world scenario that it's cool that all 3 of our departments still operate that way.
Yeah.
That's kind of the work you guys put in is still affecting Central Indiana today in 3 outlying departments. So
the part 1 to that question for me is active shooter. Never thought I'd be wearing ballistic vests or have ballistic vests on our apparatus. So I know that that's this day and age, but I didn't. I assume probably EMS was the big change for you guys, but there may have been something else that we don't know about.
Yeah, EMS was a big shift. When I started the fire department, ours was the second class that was trained as EMTs, and it was a cultural shift because a lot of the people that were firefighters back then that's what they hired in to do. As the old saying goes, I didn't hire in to become a doctor, And oh my God, everybody had to be trained. And for some of the old guys, they didn't want to be trained, and they were far enough along in their career where they were resistant.
There you go.
And so the leadership at the time had to find innovative ways to bring these guys in because they didn't want to fire them. They knew these guys are good people. But to me, it's another example of leadership. How do you herd a bunch of cats? It's difficult. Independent thinkers, very good at what they do, but the policies and things have changed, and you got to keep your department moving in that direction. And that's a testament. They got it done. It wasn't easy, but that's a big thing. I mean, that was probably the biggest thing I can think of on a cultural change. In the latter part of my career, I was watching all the electric vehicles come in. Whole new way of fighting fires. Auto construction was changing, so auto extrication, which we did a ton of, the methods were changing, and you could get seriously hurt around some of these vehicles if you weren't keeping up.
It's so wild to me to hear you say that, and I knew that was going to be the answer, the EMS. For me, as a leader, I've always told people, and this started when I was a young probie. I hated EMS. I couldn't. I wasn't good at it.
It's because you didn't pay attention.
It's because in school I didn't pay attention. But I had a guy come to me and go, "Why would you want to suck at 80% of what you do?" And right, wrong, or indifferent, we're doing 80% EMS now, especially in the outlying, So, and that was one way they kind of got to me. Another way I'm very fortunate they hammered this home. I mentioned that I hated being on the ambulance, and they made me wear a fanny pack with all type of EMS supplies in it. So, to kind of humble me.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. So still to this day, if someone mentions the hate EMS, that's in my department. That pays the bills. Keeps me employed. We would only need about 7 or 8 of us if we truly only paid people based off what we did.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to hammer that message home today. Is hey, you are hired to do the job. The job includes EMT. So don't suck at 80% of what you do. So, but to think for you guys, that were, Indianapolis Fire Department was Indianapolis Fire Department. They didn't run EMS and everything, and that must have been a tough one.
Well, there was a guy's name is Bob Zickler who actually ushered in EMS on the Indianapolis Fire Department, and the upper administration at the time was a little resistant to it because they saw, the fire services continuing to be the future. Well, Chief Zickler looked at it. He saw the big picture in the country, what was going on, that the fire departments that were not incorporating EMS or something new, like we ended up getting, of course, in hazmat, that was mandated, but technical rescue, he ushered all that in. And he has very, very much a vision of where the fire service was going. And he fought it both above him, the administration, and the firefighters. I mean, he had a lonely job. And he's an intelligent, super smart man. And but it was I can't imagine his lonely nights. Just feeling that this is what was needed. And he referred one time, because he taught the EMS class at our training academy, and he talked about the railroad, how the railroad was scaling down at the time, and how the old railroaders didn't want to hear it. They wanted to keep things the way they were, and they didn't want to modernize the future to protect jobs, create new jobs. And he saw that, and that's a rarity in the fire service, especially back then.
Yeah, well, if you don't evolve, you die.
Right.
So it's
true.
So changing. And we're again, this from all of us younger generation. I'm thankful for guys like him that came in and did the hard stuff, because I'm still not good at EMS, but I am, in the buggy. I got an AED, I got an EMS bag, and commonly I'm first.
Yeah.
I'm first on scene. So my job is to provide a public service. So I've kind of rose to the rank and rose to EMS is a part of our life, and it's 80% of what I do. And
mental note: don't drive through new paths.
extremely important. Extremely important. Any other questions before we?
What about assume 78 still riding tailboard?
Oh yeah.
What about
yeah.
that
Wow.
change?
That was a big one.
Yeah. That was harsh. But it was, like you say, if you didn't know any different, there were some cab overs, what they call cab overs, nothing enclosed,
Yeah.
nothing with doors on it.
This is why we have Dale on the podcast, because we don't remember that. Dale asked a question that Ryan and I have no clue about. So.
Nothing.
But the funny thing about it, I think I look back on it, and nowadays, people spend big money for experiences.
Yes.
To drive a race car, there's all sorts of things, big money to do that, because we're all pretty much sealed in our cars and our homes and interstate highways. Well, back then, the winters were harsh and it was tough, and you froze. Froze. But so were your other backsteppers. The guys in the front, they were cold. They were what they call convertibles, open cabs. So, but my point on the experience, it was a lousy experience, but the springtime was glorious.
That's probably the seat to be at.
I'm telling you, and I can remember so many times, man, beautiful spring day, the officer would say, "Hey guys, get on the back, let's go to Dairy Queen."
Yeah.
And when you're on the back step and the windows are down, there's the kids waving and their beautiful mothers waving back to us. It was delightful. It was. So would I want to do it again? No, not really, but I'm glad I did it.
As fast as fire trucks are now.
Oh,
my gosh.
And
The other thing, too, is we would have like 10 engineers if we still had manuals.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
What's that?
I would have held the flashlight for whoever was driving.
But one quick thing about that, how wild that was to be on the back step, and you hear the radios, coming over, and you're hanging on, got your coat on, and you're on your way. All of a sudden, you see a column of smoke in the distance, and you can see it. And the officer turns around. We're going to be first in, and you always knew whichever side the plug was on, That's who caught the plug. And for the other guy on the back step, you had to swing way over and out of the way because once they took off, once he wrapped the hydrant and took off, those butts started flying out of the back. And some of them back then were big brass butts. They were. And those things would take you out. And they made sure you knew that. But then once they finally stopped, then you went to work. But I hate to say it was a thrill, but it was a thrill. I mean, to really be a part of that teamwork.
That's an experience I would want to pay for.
Yeah,
You know what?
Again, that brings me back to I feel like I should have been born in the '60s because that sounds fun to me. I would have never promoted.
Yeah.
And think about your reaction time on arrival.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're not having to open a door,
Yeah.
unbuckle a seatbelt, get out, climb down steps, go around to the rig. You're there, boom, you're off seconds. You have a hydrant wrapped.
And
Going.
it's like a team. You gotta be on the money.
Yeah.
Notes you can't mess it up.
It's probably been a minute since you've been in a fire truck. Now the greatest, as house captain, I learned this. One of the greatest bitches that firefighters have is there's no AC, the heat isn't working, and so we talk about how much we've changed. I say that I want that stuff, but then again, on a hot day, you get in your fire engine and you got that AC. It's like I might be spoiled, and I guess maybe too much of a diva. But if we didn't have those people coming off the back step to tell us those stories, that's where we came from.
Well, that's, I talked about it before. Is like people complain at the firehouse the Wi-Fi is slow.
Yeah.
I remember when the biggest complaint was you didn't have a full deck of cards to play cards with.
And it's the other shift's fault.
Yeah, there's it's always the lazy shift before and after
It's
you.
usually B shift's fault.
Hey,
Sorry.
Well, yeah, we have all three shifts here, so we can't blame it on other people.
Jordan, do you have anything for him? Do you have any questions? That's a new guy.
I say the main one being like newer myself and being a pro. This is my second time being a Pro B. I'd say being the officer, like what was the number one thing you saw out of someone that caught your attention to think like, I like that individual, or, they're, contributing right away. You hear a lot of different things, but I'd like to know like your number one thing that you saw from young firefighters that they showed that through their career, you could sort of tell they were going to be a good firefighter.
Well, that's a good question. It really is. I was always impressed, I think, with guys that had they wanted to learn. They had quiet confidence. They weren't trying to prove anything, it seemed like. And but they're kind of the guys that they could, let me put it this way, they could change it up. They were good at being serious and focusing, yet when it was time to laugh and have some fun and be part of the group, they blended right in. So in other words, they were like multi-talented, if you will. And I know that's something you develop as the years go on, but if you can go from focused, being very serious, getting the job done, and then at another appropriate time, you're just one of the guys, and you're getting along, and you're humble, well-rounded. Does that kind of make sense to you? I don't know if there's one thing you can put your finger on, because there's so many talents and skills that go into, in my opinion, making a good officer. And believe me, I had so many good examples. Mm-hmm. I could rattle off so many names of people that affected my career. And I wanted to emulate the good things that they did. And now most of them are gone, And but one of the things that they all had in common is that they were well respected by the majority of the rank and file. There's something about them. They had that something. I mean, even the Keith Smith, our chief. Man, what a wonderful man he was. What a wonderful mentor. But he could be a type of guy, hold a room spellbound with a speech, an impromptu speech. And he could also be a guy where you'd sit down in an informal setting and he'd tell god-awful stories about himself and have people dying laughing. They just absolutely cracking up over some story he's telling about himself. So, he was a a humble guy, but he's a great leader.
I actually had one opportunity. I never met him personally, but I did have an opportunity. We talk about the giants of the fire service, and I would put Keith Smith up there in Central Indiana, based off the time I heard him speak. I went to a union conference, and him and the Tom Hannafy, who worked together on several contracts in Indianapolis, and probably always had a really good labor management. One thing that I hope in my young career, and I hope that people will remember Keith Smith for being a transformational leader. And if we're going to talk about the athletic club, but when you read about that in Central Indiana, you truly realize how hard it must have been to lead a department after an incident like that.
Oh.
And I think the changes that came about that we talk about today, that we're blessed with today, there was a guy leading that. There was a guy leading the charge that said, "I don't want this to happen again."
Oh,
So
right.
so I hope every young person, I know he's passed on now. I hope every young firefighter gets an opportunity to learn about Keith Smith. And I was blessed to hear the conversations of him and the union going at it. But then again,
my God.
they would make up and go to a bar and so
I could tell you a story. I don't have to do it now, but I can tell you a story about how that started with Keith Smith and Tom Hannafy.
Please do.
Keith Smith told me the story personally, if you want to hear it.
yeah.
Keith was a fairly new fire chief, the fire chief, and he has officers in the city-county building, and Tom Hannafy was a backstepper, union president. He came in to talk to Keith, and Keith said that he's at his desk working at this, that, and the other, and Tom comes right in through the door, and the door's wide open, and Tom, if you know Tom very well, he is wailing on Keith Smith over some issue that Tom's mad as hell about. And Keith said that, he says, "Man, it caught me off guard." He goes, "It made me angry." He come and barge into my office and lean over my desk shouting, pointing his finger at me. And he says, I stood up on my chair, and he says, I started shouting right back at him. And he says, something came over me, and he goes, got a hold of himself, and he goes, wait, stop. He said he walked around, he goes, closed the door on his office, went back into his chair, he says, sit down. He goes, but it was time. Tom just stood there, didn't say anything. And he told him, he says, Tom, I'm going to be in this job for a long time, and you're going to be in your job for a long time. We got to find a way to get it along, so sit down and let's talk. And he told me, I said, what'd Tom do? And he says, he sat down. He goes, when we started talking, man to man. And he said that the thing that got him, he goes, wasn't so much Hannafy coming in shouting. He says it was his response to it. He was upset with himself because he flew off the handle and got angry. He said one of the things he prided himself throughout his entire career and was always being calm, being the calmest person, whether it's at the firehouse or on a fire scene, just being calm. And he says, that's something that's a self-control thing that is not easy to maintain, But he said that started off a beautiful relationship. And they started the 10 city initiatives, and they did wonderful things.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of the things that we have come to enjoy as, I hate the word career firefighters, but, the union has established that, and the professional firefighters, and I hate those two words, and I always will, because I think there's professional volunteers, and there's, that word and career, I think that, career is anything you dedicate your life to. So I think that, volunteers can fit in that realm too. But to tie this all back, I think that, the work that those two did in Indianapolis, spread throughout the state. The work he did in Carmel after he left Indianapolis, he built a Carmel fire department. And a lot of what Tom Hannafy and Keith Smith worked on, we enjoy today. And I'm sure that Tom learned a lot. Tom led our union in the state of Indiana for several years. I've been blessed to know him and to learn from him. But, Keith Smith and Tom Hannafy's relationship probably shaped a lot of what we do pension-wise and state-wise, and, our health and safety and all the, so those conversations that happen, union management, they can butt heads, but eventually they got to get on the same page. So, and
got to find a way.
The benefit's still happening today.
So the one thing that we mentioned earlier is name. you can easily tarnish your name, or you can have a name that people are like, oh yeah, I'll work with this person. I think when my name's said, people maybe respect it some, but I think about the legacies.
Sure.
So, I mean, Jordan came into our department after working somewhere else for a few years, and he's got to make a name for himself, even though we share the same last name. But I also don't want to make his name for him. He needs to do that himself. And I am glad we don't allow, he can't work on my shift.
Sure.
Because I do ride up in the battalion. So there's that conflict. I'm glad he's on a different shift because he can make his own name. And the shift he's on, I get along with all of them, but I guarantee they don't give a crap what his last name says. He's got to prove himself. So that, that's the thing too, is if I was a shitbag my whole career, what do you think Jordan's last name?
Oh,
Well, full transparency, I added Jordan as a friend on Facebook because of his last name. I'm like, I love Dale, so guess what? I'm probably going to like this guy. So, I'm not on your department, but, and Ryan and I talked about this on the way over here. I want to do a legacy series because I think that there's a real value. My father wasn't a firefighter. I didn't have any family that were firefighters. But I love sitting down with those that did, because they grew up in the firehouse. There are a lot of guys that from your generation that have sons and grandsons on Indianapolis today. And I love the stories of that. And I think the fire service is a family. They grow up in the fire service. They come visit us at the firehouse. And then eventually they're like, oh, man, this is kind of cool. Dad is always smiling. Dad picks up overtime all the time. Dad does this. So I think that couldn't be overstated, that your name is so important.
I've shown this picture before. I mean, there's Jordan right there sitting on my lap.
Oh man.
See, it was destiny.
Now my other two boys, they share the same last name, but they don't share the passion for the career. They're going to make lots of money and because they're way smarter than us two combined.
Well, I'd say the world needs everybody.
Yeah.
Bring your talents and skills.
For sure. I've been over here in my mind trying to think how we bring up we want to talk about the athletic club, but first and foremost I want to be respectful, and I want to sympathize and realize that that's probably not an easy topic for you to talk about all the time. I've read about you. I've read interviews where you've said, it's not something. I know that there are people that don't like going around that building. But a lot of what I teach young firefighters is to honor and remember. And before we get into this, I want to say that, I read about your story, and I'm going to let you tell it by all means, but a little tidbit that we all have taken from it. Just before we get into this heavy topic, I want you to know that, we teach young firefighters to use their emergency buttons if they need to because of you, because of the things you've done. So I know this is not a fun topic to talk about, but our show is about how firefighters can take stuff away. So I want you to know that we're not here to hear you tell a war story as much as I want young firefighters to learn, because you're speaking of name, your name in Central Indiana, it matters, and it always will, as long as I'm around, as long as the young kids that I teach are around. So
it's huge in my career.
I really, like I said, I've been sitting over here thinking about how can we segue into this. We've talked a lot about leadership, and I based off what I know, which is very little, I've read about it, but there's a lot of leadership shown that night and then after that night, and Central Indiana is a great debt to you and Keith Smith and everybody else. So let's
that was 2 months before I moved to Indiana, that incident.
Yeah,
So
my father grew up with John Lorenzano. They played CYO sports together. So it's always been something that I've thought about. It's always, I've heard his daughter speak. I've always thought about it. I've always taught about it. let's talk a little bit about the athletic club fire, and by all means, this is your story, as much as you want, as little as you want, and again, this is about honor and respect and learning. So,
well, it was an event that changed everything for me and for the people I work with and way beyond. And that that incident was how that day started was the Mike Tyson rape trial was going on at that time. He was accused of raping Desiree Washington, I believe her name was, the year before at the Black Expo, and he was being convicted. He was being brought to trial here in Indiana, and that was a international news story. Big deal, because he's a heavyweight champion of the world, big deal. So they had, the trial was going on, and the jury was being sequestered at the athletic club, which was for those that don't know it, because it's a condominium now, I believe. And at the time, it was a sports complex. It had banquet rooms. It had bars. First 3 floors had a variety of things going on. Then above it was like a hotel. So, but I got a crew together. I was at Station 7 on the A shift, and we were a 10-person crew at the time, tactical rescue house. And I kept up on what was going on. I got the guys together and says, "You guys got to think about this. If we happen to get a tactical rescue run, or got to rescue a window washer off the side of a building, or anything unusual," I said, "all these news media trucks that are here," I says, "they're here to report news. They're going to be on us. So keep that in mind. So watch your P's and Q's. Let's
as
just
an
watch."
officer, situational awareness matters, and
Yeah,
this is a prime opportunity to understand that.
Yeah, because it's just even though we want to do a great job every day we go to work, but you know how it is. Anytime you've got lights focused on you, you want to be on your very best. Just nothing out of the ordinary. Just do your job and do it well. And so we had a couple of fires that day. I think we had an extrication. It was a normal February day, and as I guess there is no really, shouldn't say normal, but it was a day that like other days we had. And just after midnight, the call came in, and it was smoke in the lobby at the athletic club. And of course, man, our ears perk up, and we're the first responding crews that arrive. And of course, we arrive and do a quick size up, which was nothing showing from the exterior, and we go in to investigate. So as we go in, there's light smoke inside the lobby, and so we go to the night watchman, and the night watchman, there was no sprinkler system in this 9-story building. It was built, in the 20s. There was fire alarm system was very rudimentary, and just a zone kind of a thing. And the poor night watchman was not comfortable, obviously, with all these firemen in his face, wanting information from him. So we started an investigation. And of course, our battalion chief, he arrived, and the division chief also would arrive at anything in the mile square, and immediately put us to work to search. At the time, I was a captain on 11 or 7's ladder, and we were sent down to the basement and the sub-basement to check, because there was a large alert going off down there. So we had light smoke in the lobby coming through a big, great event, and we go down and check everything. Just light, cold smoke, not pushed around and not moving. So trying to radio back up, and we had the new 800 megahertz radios, and wasn't very successful getting that communication up there. So came back up, met with the division chief, and a lot of smoke in the lobby at this time. He says, "Spalding, they found it. It's up on the 3rd floor." So we had 4 people on it was a tiller ladder, and John Lorenzano was a sub at the time, just been on a very short period of time. And John was with me. Wherever I went, John was with me, which was typical for a brand new sub, especially a sub that's riding extra. So John and I, we go up, and we didn't use our mask down below, because back then you didn't, you use your mask when you needed it. You just didn't use up your air until you really had to. So as we go up the staircase, you could hear a lot of commotion. The farther we got up the grand staircase, between the second and third floor, that last flight of stairs, smoke was banked down real low in the hallway. And I turned around to John, looked him in the eyes, put your mask on. I said, stay close. And he nodded to me. So we had eye-to-eye contact. And we get on air, and in we go. We're down low, and you can see a hose line coming down the hallway, snaking through these doors. And so we follow the hose line, which is normal procedure for us at the time. We follow the hose line, find out where the fire is, and then you look for, obviously, victims along your way, and find out and make ventilation opportunities, assist the engine crew as best you can. And as we're going in, there's, hardly see anything. I had a flashlight on my helmet, and so I had that on, and there was, on the hose line, we stopped at a doorway coming in or to another room. And you could hear a lot of activity in there, but there was a couple firefighters that were backed up, which was not unusual, until the smoke lifts a little bit, you don't know where to go or what to do, and that's as far as they could go. So we're waiting for a little bit of movement here, and we're crouched down low on our knees, and then all of a sudden you can hear water being sprayed around and different firefighters shouting. They had their mask on too. And I noticed when I had my flashlight, and it was on the Scott SCBA, the guy that was in front of me, which I'm not sure who it was, but because he's crouched over too. But that SCBA, that bright yellow SCBA, had this big particles of soot on it. And it was really just kind of one of those things like, because you're relying on all your senses, and look at those big particles, and didn't think a whole lot of it really at the moment because there's so many things happening. But then I hear somebody say, Woody's in trouble. Woody's in trouble. You hear somebody shouting that out. And Woody, that was Elwood Galenius's nickname. And so anyway, he was riding out on 13's engine, another downtown engine company. At first, got the first water on it. Anyway, all of a sudden, this guy in front of us gets knocked to the side, and here comes Woody coming out through that doorway. He doesn't have his helmet on. He's got his mask on, but he's staggering. He's in some kind of distress, something. I thought, man, this guy needs help, So anyway, so I grab him by the left arm, and I pull him down toward us because it was hot up higher. It was real hot. So I was pulling him down. I figured, well, follow the hose line out, get him to the stairs and get the hell out of here, get him some help. So as we peel around, and John peels around behind me, and off we go. And I'm trying to feel this hose. You can't see anything. It's just like, you're on the third floor. I have no idea where the windows are. Well, anyway, as we're going, man, it just gets hotter and hotter, and all of a sudden, boom, it just, it lit up. I could see little flickers of fire, but it was like, the heat was kind of like blast furnace. If you ever open an oven to get something out of the oven and you stick your head in there, you don't have to think that's hot and back away. Man, you react. You just fly, and that was the feeling. It was like you just got slammed down to the floor because it was so unbelievable hot. Burned my ears. I had a mask. I had a hood at the time, a Nomex hood, but it was a kind of an optional thing. You didn't have to wear it. Mm-hmm. And we normally wore them in the wintertime around our necks to keep our, warm, but rarely do we put them up because back in the day, you use your ears as a temperature sensor. If your ears are getting hot, you're in too far. You need to back up a little bit. In other words, there's a regulator for you, so you didn't get into someplace you shouldn't be. And so my hood was on the dash of the ladder because it was such a short trip to the athletic club from Station 7. That's where my hood was, but my ears just got roasted. And so I'm driven down to the floor, and I'm looking around. I can see just like bits of fire. It's hard to describe, but the pain was intense. Just my God, it was, and the noise of it all was like a roar. It was just like hard to describe. But I knew we were in trouble, and I didn't know which way was in or out. I swept around trying to find the hose line. I couldn't find the hose line. I don't know where Woody is. I don't know where John is. They're not in my immediate area on the floor. And I'm in a position to go searching for anybody because, at that point that we were in, you weren't going to survive. There's just no way to survive that spot. And I'm on the floor, so I hit the radio, try to call for help. And I've listened to the transcript of that before, and I mean, it was like, as a panicked individual, and I always tried to be calm and collected, on the radio transmissions, but when you're getting roasted like that, you don't operate like you think you would. There's no way to prepare yourself for that. So I tried to make that call, and then I thought, well, emergency button. Our brand new 800 megahertz radios had this little orange round button on the top, and we were taught this is one of the neat features of this. If you get in trouble, press that, and that's an immediate mayday. They relate that to your radio. So I tried to push the button, and I had big, heavy fire gloves on. I couldn't get a push. I couldn't hear. I couldn't tell. So I was in a situation like I have to push the button. So I pulled my right glove off, which immediately roasted my right hand. But I was able to push that button. And I pushed it, and I pushed it. And I tried to tuck my hand under my coat with laying down on the floor, knowing that, man, this is getting worse and worse. And, I need to get to someplace cooler, I can't say cooler, less hot, so I can make more radio communications to do something to regroup. So there's nobody around me. I couldn't feel anybody. So I just started to crawl. I had no idea where the hose line was and no idea where the staircase was. So I started to crawl, like an army crawl. And I'm crawling along, and my helmet comes off. And then my SCBA straps burned off. And back then, they weren't reinforced with cabling in them, and they weren't Nomex. They were changing them over. So they weren't all changed over yet. So now I'm crawling down this hallway, I find out later, and I'm dragging my mask by the SCBA facepiece, and it's just roaring. I mean, I knew that I'm in trouble. And finally that SCBA got hung up. And by that time, I couldn't keep going. I mean, I was sapped. And at the time, I was 40 years old. I figured I was well trained on the fire department, and I never thought something like this had happened. I thought, well, maybe it would be an explosion that we couldn't foresee. That might take you out, or maybe a collapse because of a building that had been compromised. But to get caught in a fire and be a fire victim, there's like no way in the world that's ever going to happen. We're too smart, we're too fast, we're too well trained. It's not supposed to happen. And here it is. You go from being a firefighter to a fire victim. And the shock and the overload of that, on top of all the pain, plus the two guys I was with I'm supposed to take care of, overwhelming. And but as I couldn't go any farther, and I got my mask on, I feel like I'm roasting alive. Now, I'd be dead if not for that face piece. And the face piece ended up warping way out of shape. I saw it later. My fire coat, I still have it. It's heavily damaged. It was a brand new. It was. I had two sets of gear back then, which the fire department didn't supply us stuff. So I had two sets of gear. It was my newest set of gear, great condition, and it was roasted to the devil. My microphone cord and all that was burned up. But I could hear my ears sizzling, in my head, the top of the mask where the nylon netting is, that was all burned out. And but I thought, this is it. This is the end of the road, and because I couldn't do, I felt all alone. I didn't know where anybody else was. As far as I knew, they got out, or then I could hear somebody in the distance, calling for help. And that was pretty haunting. And I still to this day am not sure who it was, because not only was I trapped up there, but Edward Galenius ended up dying right there in that, I think, in that spot. And John Lorenzano crawled off in a different direction, eventually ran out of air and was not found. And he died there. And Compared Helms was trapped on the 3rd floor and got rescued by Five's engine crew, who came to the top of the stairs, and she was right there, and they just pulled her out and got it. She got badly burned. Greg Gates fell down a flight of stairs and was trapped. There, wasn't able to get out. Then there was a civilian also that died, a 71-year-old gentleman who was staying in the hotel. They found him in the stairway. But I was, I guess, the luckiest of the unlucky ones that Tom Arthur came in through a 3rd floor window and started putting out fires. He got a hose line, took his hose line, went to 13's ladder. They took him up on the tower ladder. They went in through that window, and his crew located me. They were the first ones to me, and he said that the guys that he was with at the time said they wouldn't have followed anybody in that fire if it wasn't Tom Arthur. But he was an icon. That's a guy you should be interviewing. He's an icon. Everybody respected Tom's ability to be one hell of a firefighter. Lots and lots of rescues, lots of awards. But Tom came in and they put out a lot of fire that they had, which was it was a flashover, so it was a different kind of fire. But anyway, they put the fire out and went as far as they could with their hose line. And Tom said he heard something that sounded like it was human, as he describes it. And it was in this direction. They could still see a little bit of fire over there. And so they laid their hose line down. For an engine man to do that is pretty rare. So they followed. I mean, his 2 guys followed him, and they went over and they said they saw some boots sticking out from underneath a bunch of rubble where the ceiling had collapsed. And that's where they found me. They said they dug all that stuff off and they rolled me over, and they said I was pretty much unconscious at that time. And I don't remember them finding me. I do remember starting to be revived once they started to set me up, because I was burning. I was hot. I mean, every place they touched me, like the backs of my arms, you could see where they grabbed me, because at any rate, they dragged me over the hose line, opened up the fire coat, and hosed me down. It took me out through the window, and some other crews started coming up at that time. It was a second wave that came in, because after the flashover, that everybody just got out the best they could, and some of the crews went out over 7's ladder out of the windows. So lots of guys went out over the windows. They were rescuing so many guys out of the windows, they ended up injuring one guy's foot, because they had to retract the aerial to move to another spot. And Dave Smurge got his foot broken, I believe it was. And so I didn't know about. Well, I mean, I was out. They put me out immediately. They intubated me and put me out, and put me into the burn unit at Wishart, which at that time was the old TB ward, believe it or not. And it was primitive, God. No restrooms in the rooms, and no TVs, nothing. It was primitive. But it's much better now with Eskenazi. But if not for him, I'm sure I wouldn't be sitting here. So I mean, I was rescued. I was a fire victim that got rescued. So I appreciate every time I read about a firefighter that loses his life, or you hear about rescues. I've got a strong connection to that, and always will have. And I could talk about this for hours, but I do want to get to 2 pivotal points. One point was, I'm in a hospital. A lot of people were coming in to visit, a lot of people, as I was going through debridement and bandage changes. But they finally cut off the visitors. But at one time, John's brother, Tony Lorenzano, and came up to see me along with Tony Matthews, which was one of the guys that I'd worked with at the 7s. And they came up to see me, and Tony was a policeman with IMPD, and I knew him, and I can recall when John came to the station, he said, I hear my little brother's coming to the station, make sure you take care of him. And I said, I will. And we laughed and joked about it. And here they come walking through the room, into the end. I mean, I was overwhelmed. I mean, man, I lost. It still bothers me to this day. And Tony came up to the bed. He goes, "It's okay, Mike. It's okay." He goes, "I you know." And but he did everything he could to make me feel better. And knowing he didn't blame me. Let me put it that way. And then Woody Galenius had 4 daughters, and he was a grandfather, and he was getting married. He was getting remarried, and his 4 daughters, who I still know and see him from time to time, always get a wonderful embrace from him. That they didn't point their finger at me and say, "We blame you that we lost our father." Had they done that, that'd have been the end of the fire service for me, without a doubt. But I did my. I mean, I was by far from the best officer or most perfect guy by any means, but I tried to train guys, in TAC rescue, and I kind of took the job seriously. In fact, Tommy Deal, who was a lieutenant at Station 13, his nickname for me was Captain Serious, and we still joke about that to this day, Captain Serious. And I didn't, you always have nicknames you don't want, but but I took it in stride, but to me, that's a lesson for all officers, that God forbid something like that happens to you. You don't want that family member coming back to you saying, "I point their finger, I blame you." I mean, whether it's justified or not, that's a hell of a thing to have on your conscience.
Wow.
But, and the last thing, I wanted to say 2 quick things. I was recovering, working light duty, and had burn garments on, my hands and a vest because a lot of burns on my back too. And still a mess, but recovering, and FDIC was in town, and they wanted me to speak at their conference in the Sycamore room. And it's like, I'm not a public speaker. I don't do that. I train small groups of firefighters, and hold their attention for a little while, but I'm not a training officer or a public speaker. Keith Smith invited me into his office, and as I told you, world of respect and admiration for that man. And he sat down, he goes, "Hey, I hear you don't want to speak at the FDIC." And I said, "Yeah." We knew each other well enough that, we could speak pretty casually. And he said, "Well, I'll tell you, Mike," he goes, "you think about it like this." He goes, "It's your decision. Think about it like this." He goes, "You can tell a story that Woody and John can't." And how do you say no after that?
Oh my God.
And since then, I mean, I've been, especially in the years following that, that different fire departments would want to come and have me talk to their crews, and it was never for money, ever, and it was never for entertainment purposes, like, hey, we got a crowd of looky-loos that want to hear your, death-defying story. It was always for firefighters, maybe that they would learn something that might help them. So, and that's the reason I'm here to this day, that I'd rather not talk about this. I mean, it's still haunting, and I had to go through facing my personal demons after all that on whether or not to go back to the fire service. But, it's my people, it's my family, it's where I belong. And it was a hard decision. But the Indianapolis Fire Department administrative staff with Keith Smith, Jim Greason, Mike Shank, Pat Nix, I could go on and on naming these guys. They were welcoming. They were letting me come back at my own speed, and they made it happen, made it possible. And for that, I'll always be indebted to those guys and everybody. I mean, men and women of the fire service are wonderful at support, wonderful.
So it's incredibly hard to come up with words. But you talked about, you spoke about this to firefighters in hopes that they get the message. I have studied the fire service since I got on. Like I said, I teach the history, and I want you to personally know, as well as, I'm sure others are listening, whether it be from the clouds or hopefully on here, the changes that Indianapolis Fire Department made after that, they made a difference in the fire service. It's my understanding not every firefighter had a radio, and after that, every firefighter had a radio.
Pass devices,
Flashlights, pass devices,
PPE.
Indianapolis in itself. If you read about it, and I'm sure you could talk more about this for another time or whenever. They came up with a high-rise plan. The city of Indianapolis requires sprinklers.
It's a model.
And I think as a newer firefighter and someone who came after that, I think that it's our job to honor the fallen and to learn about them and to pay tribute every day, but also on that day. But also, if you're a new firefighter in this job, you got to be thankful for those that came before us, because the struggles they had and the hardships they have, are the reason we all have radios now. And, everyone changes their battery in the morning. They have a radio. We make it a point to teach our people to hit that orange button, and you talked about it was hard. Well, now they've made the buttons bigger and they're right by the antenna so you can feel it. And I would challenge everybody listening today, especially if you're an officer, do a drill with your guys and have them practice hitting that button. I'm blessed that I've never had to, but I would be remiss if I said I wasn't thankful for all we talked about transformational leadership and Keith Smith leading a department after something like that happens, and the changes made in Indianapolis. They spread.
Went nationwide.
Yeah,
they went nationwide.
They spread, and FDIC still comes here today. In part, the work that was done after that. So,
well, the union leadership, with Tom Anafee and others, Keith Smith, obviously, but Steve Goldsmith, the mayor, he was very supportive.
Yeah,
did a wonderful job.
I know that I can't say I know. I'm thankful that you came and was willing to talk about this, and I was very, very cautious. Like I said, I was struggling to figure out how to bring it up, but I think it's a message that younger firefighters need to hear, and be thankful for what you have, and first and foremost, our gear has come very far. You talked about the Nomexes were optional in those days, and now it's a requirement.
Yeah.
When I moved to Indiana, and I got on a volunteer department. We went to Wayne Township to get the gear. I was down near Bloomington. When we go to Wayne Township, get the gear, they hand me a hood, and I was like, "Does it get that cold here?" Because we never had hoods in Maine. Because I started my fire service in Maine, and I was like, we never had hoods, but I myself have been, not to the extent I've been burned in a fire, my ears and the back of my neck. And I know that sizzling part and that excruciating pain. And fortunately, I didn't end up in a burn unit. I did some outpatient stuff and all that. But even that little bit, I couldn't imagine what you went through with your back, your hand, your neck, the top of your head. Everywhere they touch. How many times we talk about, you're in a live fire training, don't touch me because you're going to leave an imprint. But at that moment, we're just trying to get you out.
Yeah, you got to do what you got to do.
What you got to do. And I've been fortunate enough. You've come down to my department and talked the story several times. Again, my honor that you're here to tell again, because I could tell it's not easy for you all these years later to talk about this. But what happened that day to all of you has saved so many lives in the fire service since that day.
Yeah.
The way departments looked at IFD, the radios, as Tony mentioned, the PPE, operating procedures, and all that. You guys have saved so many lives going around and speaking. So hopefully I'm thanking you from the whole American Fire Service, but thank you for telling it. I always talk about Phoenix Fire Department. They're huge on getting the story out, getting the whys.
That's another
how
good
comes the
idea of
changes.
transformational leadership.
Yes.
After that, Charleston had one where you got to take an overhaul of your department after something like that happens. I know the NIOS reports and all of this stuff it's not fun reading. It's hard to read. If you're a blue collared fellow like myself, it's hard to read all of that. But I think that you have to dive into those and having you here was a very few times in my life have I been speechless. I'm a talkative guy, and anybody will tell you that. But it's humbling to hear that story, and I do want you to know, and it's very important on another show to honor and remember. But I do want you to know, and Dale said it, and I've said it, but we need to say it a dozen times that the things that happened that night and what you guys did, is a message that we have to teach firefighters today, because you guys made a difference, and I know that it's probably tough to tell, and I could see it in your face, but it's you probably are a big influence on a lot of people. Like I said, I was blessed that I read about this. I've heard you speak about it before. I've watched the documentary Indianapolis put out, but it's truly humbling, and you've made a difference in your career. You talked about your name. People know
Yes.
your name,
Yeah.
and as long as I'm around, they will continue to know your name.
Well, I just don't want to forget John and Woody. To me, I didn't rescue anybody that night. I always just tried to do the best I could, and that's the way I was trained, and I took it seriously, and I feel like I failed that night, honestly. And it's a wonder I'm sitting here. But there's a lot of other things that happen on it. It's a complicated fire. It's the most investigated fire in Indianapolis history, from ATF to the National Fire Academy to tons of agencies investigated that fire because they want to know about the origins. And so the timeline's broken down second by second. The transcripts are all written. It's all there. The National Fire Academy has got tons of information from not only this fire, but other significant fires. You can learn a ton about how things can go south, in the fire service. So, like you say, it's not great reading, but it's like if you feel like you're a professional and you want to get better, it's good technical reading because it helps prepare you. And because you never know when the next god-awful disaster is coming down. And if you're in a position of authority in the fire service, they turn to you.
Yes.
What do you want us to do? And from my experience from some of the major incidents I've been on, is that you can count on chaos. It's just part of it. And I think our job is to try to make some order out of chaos. And sometimes you can do it more quickly than other times. And this fire had, there were dozens of people that were rescued out of upper floor windows. The radio was crackling constantly. It was people everywhere. And to try to say, well, I want to get a grasp on what's going on when it's dynamic and it's changing moment by moment, that's a tall order. That's a tough thing to do. And but for a fire officer, you need to prepare yourself for that. You need to get ready for those god-awful situations where you got to try and organize things. And sometimes it's not easy. And people are shouting in your face, and people screaming over here, and sirens are whipping up, and you don't have a clear vision of what's going on. All fire chiefs and officers at some point have to make decisions on imperfect information. It's just the nature of the business. And until the smoke rises, you're making decisions on imperfect information. That's just how it is.
Wow. There's the one connection I have with the incident around the 2004-ish time frame, 2003. I was involved with Franklin College, and they redid their student center and cafeteria. And I remember that there was a John Lorenzano Memorial plaque in there and picture. And I wanted to make sure that did not disappear. So I was involved with the reallocation, relocation of that after the remodel, and they got put back in the student center. And we had John Salka from FDNY come in and do a seminar, and we had IFD involved in the rededication of that.
That's wonderful. to
And
hear.
I don't know if you were there or not. I didn't know you at the time. So I was doing a college tour several weeks ago with my son, my youngest one, at Franklin College. And I went in there, and it's still displayed there. That smiling face of him waving, walking down the street in his gear.
Yeah, he's a great
and,
young man.
little
Wonderful
dedication.
family. Wonderful family.
So it is awesome that Franklin College, he is an alumni, and that they're still memorializing him to
I
this
think
day.
I think it's incredibly important. I would challenge every firefighter to read about the two men that passed away, because the effects. Like I've said this before. For as long as those last names exist, that those effects will still go on. I know that John Lorenzano's daughter probably has no memories of him.
No, she was a baby in arms
yeah.
when he died.
She was at the dedication.
I know that she has spoke at the firefighters memorial,
Yeah.
and I a great testament to any man is his children that he leaves behind. So, those two, Galenius and Lorenzano, are not forgotten, and I think that's how we remember, is to memorialize and to train and to try and make sure that our firefighters are better than before. So, thank you, and I know Dale will close with his
Yeah.
thing, but I wanted to thank you for coming on. And
Yeah, thank you
truly
very
humbling.
much.
So, got a couple things. I'm going to ask you a question that I ask every guest. If you could sit on a park bench and talk to anybody that has passed before us, who would that be?
Wow. So anybody that's
Anybody in the history?
well, that's a long, long list. I assume it's outside a family member.
It doesn't. No, it could be
Oh,
whoever you want. I mean, if
Oh.
it's multiple, you can list multiple. But
Oh, I'd love to talk to my mother and father. How much they influenced me because of things that they said when I was either a kid or a young man or an adult or a young parent. Things that they said that I just didn't relate, didn't get, however you want to say it. But they put that seed in my ear. And years later, some cases it was after they passed away, but I got what they meant. I remembered that, and I appreciate they put that seed in my ear,
awesome.
And it comes again, because they care about you, and to just show some appreciation, that's, there's lots of people. I got a whole long list of people I admire that have passed away. And of course, there's a whole lot of other people who I never met, you'd love to have a
Yes.
chance to talk to. So I guess that's kind of a quick answer, but I hadn't really thought about that.
that's awesome. Well, and I don't tell anybody I'm going to ask them that. Now, people listening, they
Yeah.
know, but it's just that, off the cuff. Yeah, there you go. Some of them I've ended with like quotes too, and this one here, it hit me. I didn't know what I was going to do, and usually it hits me during the episode. And you talked about brotherhood, protecting those next to you, those on both sides of you. You want to be good people. Keith Urban has a song for you, and here's lyrics, and this kind of hits. And I love this part about this song. It says, "Maybe you don't understand. I don't understand it all myself, but there's a brother on my left and another on the right. And in his pocket, just like mine, he's got a photograph, and they're waiting for him back home. It's weighing on my mind. I'm not trying to be a hero. I don't want to die, but right now in this moment, you don't think twice."
That's a good one.
That
That's
is,
a good one.
I mean, that's the fire service.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if we don't like the person
Yeah.
to the left or right of us. We're not going to think twice.
Well, I think the wives hate it when you say,
Yes.
would do this for them. But it's true.
We
if it's-
we watched a series on Netflix, and it was about Fukushima nuclear power plant after the
Yes.
tsunami, and the heroes that went in to try to mitigate, and the firefighters. And she said, she looked at me and she goes, "You would do that to protect us, wouldn't you?" And I said, "Absolutely. I wouldn't think twice." But that, you were talking, and I was like, Keith Urban in that moment. The last thing I have is, normally we do line of duty death remembrance. This one's going to be a little different. We're doing it at the end, and we're going to remember those that fallen at the athletic club. So we're going to remember Corporal Elwood Woody Glenius. He was 47 years old, and Private John Lorenzano, age 29. So let's do a moment of silence for those fine gentlemen. I'm going to turn it over to Tony, and I think we're going to close this, huh?
Yeah. So in closing, I hope each one of you listening to this get something from this. I know that I did, but most of all, I want you guys to take care of each other. Love this job. Love all the opportunities you're given. Wear your gear and train. Don't let the only time you do this be the worst time of your life. Sir, it's an honor and a privilege to have you here.
Yes.
It's one of the highlights of my career, and I know it's not an easy thing to do, but I want you to know that what you are doing, what you've done, your career matters, your name matters, and as I said before, as long as I'm in the fire service, I'll make sure of it.
Yep.
So take
Me
care
too.
of each other. Be safe. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Kitchen Table Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion on firefighting, the importance of training, and the incredible bond of brotherhood that unites firefighters. If you'd like to stay connected with us and access more insightful conversations, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to spread the word, and remember, stay safe out there, because together we're stronger. Until next time, take care, stay tuned for more inspiring stories from the front lines of firefighting.